Welcome to the iPad Podcast, a weekly podcast from Mac's Future.
Okay, welcome to the iPad Podcast. This is Lex at Mac's Future. Hey, and I'm sorry that this is coming out on Tuesday, the 8th of November, because this usually comes out on late Sunday night, early Monday morning. And what happened this week, I was kind of sick. And I'm fine. I think I'm finally over it. But for the last 2 days, I've had a really bad sore throat, and just under the weather, and I just couldn't do the podcast. So this is the iPad Podcast by Mac's Future. I now have a Mac's Future Google Plus page in addition to my own Lex page on Google Plus, because the Google Plus now has that. And anyways, let's go on. There's a lot of iPad stuff to talk about, so let's get to it. No chit-chat and all iPad talk. Okay, so one of the stories that came out earlier on November 2nd, I don't know, is this such a big story or is it kind of a made-up story, is that Digitime reports via MacRumors.com that Apple is going to completely overhaul the iPad, the iMac, the iPhone, and the MacBook Air in 2012. Well, in some ways it's not news because obviously at some point Apple, does upgrade the products. On the other hand, certain products like the MacBook Air line and the iMac have been sort of the same body and styling. And the iPad 2 is a little different than the iPad 1, but not radically different. And so it's expected there's going to be some changes, but here the story is that everything is going to change. And the quote here is, Apple plans to completely overhaul its product lines, including iPad, iMac, iPhone, and MacBook Air in 2012, and is expected to finalize order volumes for key parts and components for the next generation iPad in December, according to sources in the upstream supply chain. And so this, I guess, comes from Digitimes. So, yeah, I do think, the iPad 3 is going to be looking a little different than the iPad 2, which looks a little different than the iPad 1. But isn't that kind of obvious? Now, it says here in MacRumors, the iPad has only seen 2 releases, each with a slightly different design. Again, the basic design constraints will limit it to a 9.7-inch display. But another report, according to MacRumors, has suggested the 2012 design will be even thinner design. Well, of course the iPad is going to get thinner. Look, the iPad 2, the iPad 3 is going to be thinner and lighter than the iPad 2. The whole way these tablets are going is to get thinner, lighter, more powerful, and either the same battery life or longer, right? And better pixel resolution. So, this is a nice story, but really, is it telling us anything new? It's called progress, everybody. It's called progress. So the iPad will definitely at some point get thinner, more powerful, better pixels, and same or longer battery life. You heard it here. Now, Amazon will be soon delivering its Kindle Fire, its first Android Kindle, and there's already reports that Apple executives are saying they're not really worried about it. And in Business Insider on November 3rd, there was a story entitled Apple, the Kindle Fire is good for us because it's more Android fragmentation. And the story reports that Barclays analyst Ben Reitzies just met with Apple CEO Tim Cook and CFO Peter Oppenheimer, and here's what he heard about the Fire. He claims that these Apple executives said that while the pricing at $199 looks disruptive for what seems to be the iPad's most important rising challenge, the Amazon Fire, it is important to note that it could fuel further fragmentation in the tablet market, given it represents yet another platform. While compatible with Android, the apps work with Amazon products. The more fragmentation, the better, says Apple, since that could drive more consumers to the stable Apple platform. We believe that Apple will get more aggressive on price with the iPad eventually, but not compromise the product quality and experience. So this makes sense because right now, obviously the iPad dominates the tablet market. And it's going to cause some confusion among consumers if there's like the Kindle Android device, which isn't necessarily fully compatible with other Android tablets. So I do think it's correct to say that to the extent that Amazon goes a slightly different route on Android than the traditional Android, it's going to not help Android, but is going to help Apple. So I agree with that. Speaking of the Kindle Fire, there's another article in cultofmac.com which says that the next Kindle Fire could sport an 8.9-inch screen. And it says here that Amazon reportedly plans to scale down the screen size of its next Kindle Fire. Not the one coming out in November, but the one that's going to come out later that's supposed to be better. Now, originally it was expected it was going to be a 10.1-inch size products, but instead it looks like it's going to be smaller, 8.9 inches, which is smaller than the iPad's 9.7-inch. And here the story says, according to the report by Taiwan-based industry publication, quote, DigiTimes, Amazon's current 7-inch panel suppliers Chigwa Picture Tubes and LG Display reportedly have begun to prepare production capacities for 8.9-inch displays. And sources say that Amazon's supply chain told the publication a 9.7-inch or 10.1-inch model could be ready for later in 2012. So it's unclear why it would be limited to just an 8.9-inch. It maybe has to do with supplies and manufacturing. Now, the first Kindle Fire is going to arrive on November 15th and is going to only be $200. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of impact that has in the tablet market. Now, there's bad news if you happen to be a Time Warner Cable subscriber and like to use the Time Warner Cable iPad app. It seems that the litigation that's going on between Viacom and Time Warner Cable over the iPad is heating up and doesn't seem to be resolved anytime further. Now here's what's going on. Viacom, which controls a lot of content, including Paramount and channels like Comedy Central, MTV, was unhappy because Time Warner Cable allowed you to stream on an iPad through the Time Warner Cable app Time Warner TV shows, at no extra cost. You would have to do it if you had a Time Warner account. And Viacom took the position that if you're streaming to the iPad even through a Time Warner Cable account, they should get more money. And Time Warner's saying, no, we're just saving customers another cable box. And I agree with Time Warner. I mean, that's what you're doing. Frankly, if you just get a $99 Apple TV, you've got that iPad streaming, you don't need a cable box. You can just stream everything to another big display. And so it sounds to me that Viacom is being kind of piggy about wanting additional compensation from Time Warner Cable. It's not like Time Warner Cable is collecting additional fees by allowing you to stream the money to your iPad. Anyways, it's pretty ugly, dispute among traditional media and cable companies. And this is why Apple should just come in and disrupt the whole industry and put them all out of business, because they're crummy companies. I get crummy service and pay a lot of money, and I'd be happy for a different type of service. So anyways, that's the deal with the Time Warner iPad app. Okay, so good news if you have an original iPad. According to the iPadGuide.com, gestures are now going to be coming to the original iPad. And it says here, iPad owners can look forward to the next Apple iOS firmware update, as iOS 5.0.1 beta has already been seeded to developers. And it sounds like there's going to be a bug fix and new features to the iPhone and iPad users. It says here, when it comes to the original iPad, multi-finger gestures originally included in the iOS 4.3 beta update that were never deployed have finally made their way into the iOS 5.0.1 update, and that these gestures include the 4-finger and 5-finger gestures that perform different functions, including returning to the home screen without pressing the button. Now, iPad 2 owners have enjoyed these multi-finger gestures from the beginning with iOS 5 on their devices, and it says here that iOS 5.1 is going to be bringing that to original iPad users. So original iPad users, rejoice, you're going to get this cool stuff. So, that's exciting. Now, speaking of apps, Google finally launched a Gmail app for the iPhone and the iPad, and very shortly after it was launched, around November 3rd, Google pulled the app out of the App Store because there was a bug in the app, so it was buggy. So basically, it's a free Gmail app for iOS devices like the iPad, the iPhone, and the iPod Touch. And, it comes after Google did a revamped version of Gmail. So CRN.com reported that it was pulled. And this is what the article says. Google's product manager, Matthew Izot, wrote on his blog post. He said, "We've combined your favorite features from the Gmail mobile web app and iOS into one app so you can be more productive on the go. It's designed to be fast, efficient, and take full advantage of the touchscreen and notification capabilities of your device." Now, I don't know if I'm going to get it because, frankly, I find the Mail app on the iPad works well with Gmail, but I will test it to see if there's features in it that you can't get in Mail. But for now, it's pulled. So look shortly. It should be back in the App Store, and you might want to check it out. Now, the presidential campaign is underway, and this story caught my eye because the iPad's involved in it, and it just shows you how the iPad is being used by everyone, and it's quickly penetrating all parts of society. This article was in the New York Times on November 6th, and it's entitled "The Caucus," and the article is "An Aloof Romney in a Plane Encounter." And basically, it's saying that, he sort of had an encounter on an airplane. It says here, somebody who's a physician was on the plane with Mitt Romney, the candidate, someone named Ms. McClanahan, and she's a physician who heads a financial planning company, and she recognized that she was sitting next to the presidential candidate on a 2-hour flight. So according to her, about an hour into the flight, which Romney mostly spent reading USA Today and using an iPad while wearing headphones, she told him her idea for improving American healthcare system, slashing overhead costs by switching to an electronic billing system. And she said, "He looked at me blankly and said, 'I understand,' then put his iPad headphones on and kept reading," she said. So, I don't know. I mean, what I take away from that is that he really loved his iPad and was engrossed in it. The article seems to be saying that, he didn't interact with Miss McClanahan. Frankly, he was probably annoyed that he's being bugged on the airplane. It says here that Miss McClanahan said Mr. Romney was probably exhausted. She was disappointed he showed so little interest. Even another passenger's request for a restaurant recommendation in Boston elicited little from Mr. Romney. Romney might not be a great people person, which is kind of weird if he's running for president. But again, the point for me is that he was engrossed in his iPad. So maybe that's the moral of the story, is that it's hard to talk to people who are on a plane because the iPad just takes over everything. It's so engrossing. Okay, one thing that everyone has to be really careful about, there's a lot of iPad scams out there. The Augusta Chronicle, a paper in the South, has the following story: Augusta woman seeks iPad, gets binder and tile. And the article that came out on November 3rd says, an Augusta woman thought she was getting an iPad 2 and a netbook computer, but she instead ended up losing $500, according to Richmond County Sheriff's Office report. The woman named Portia Tansley said that she was in the Augusta Mall parking lot shortly after 4 p.m. Thursday when a man approached her saying he had 2 items for sale. The woman followed the man, who appeared to be in his early 30s, to a Chevrolet Impala, paid him the money, and was given a box. Tansley opened the box and found only a 3-ring binder and 12-inch by 12-inch piece of tile, according to the report. The unknown man had already driven away. But look, this is stupid, right? Why would you buy an iPad from some guy approaching you in the mall? And obviously, I mean, doesn't she think the guy's trying to sell her stolen goods? So to some extent, I don't have sympathy for her, because the whole thing sounds a little shady to begin with. That she was going to get an iPad 2 and a net-built computer for $500. So, it sounds like she's doing something shady, and she got ripped off. But the point is, look, if you're going to buy with a credit card, buy from an Apple store. And if you're not going to buy from an Apple store, buy through eBay with a credit card, because you could cancel it, and eBay and PayPal will, help you if you're a victim of fraud. But, don't buy it from some guy in the parking lot saying, I've got a deal for you. You're asking for trouble. Now, the Loop Insight.com, a Mac-oriented website run by Jim Dalrymple and Peter Cohen, has an interesting post regarding electronic medical records, health records. That's the big thing that we need reform, and that poor woman on the plane was trying to talk to Romney about. And the post basically has a quote from a blog post which said that, quote, as I've written these dozens of articles, talked to hundreds of doctors and far too many EHR, electronic health records vendors, it's become clear to me that an iPad interface is basically a must-have feature for an electronic medical record system. And the Loop says, this is the article by Peter Cohen, more doctors than ever are using iPads in their practice, either as handy guides to drug interactions or to access patient record systems remotely. Writing for the EMR and EHR blog, John advocates for vendors to consider developing native apps, as many doctors are now opting to access their desktop systems remotely using screen sharing software since they have no other option. And that makes sense. I mean, I think the iPad is a great record review device, and if we're going to have electronic records, I think the iPhone, the iPad, and other touch devices are the way to go. So I would like to see more. The Loop is basically referencing a blog post that was on November 3rd from a website called EMRANDEHR.com, which is about electronic medical records and electronic health records. And it's written here on November 3rd by somebody named John, the must-have EMR feature in iPad interface. So he goes on to say, my biggest fear with this commentary is that far too many EHR vendors are busy coding for meaningful use and EHR certification, that they're not looking for smart ways to leverage technologies like the iPad. Time will tell how this plays out, but I'll be surprised if the iPad doesn't play a part. Clearly it's going to play a part. I mean, it's just a better way to look at records. Now, the Associated Press had an article on October 26 regarding something that I'm very familiar with, which is that the iPad is a fantastic way to pacify and, get kids focused instead of being, squirmy and moving around. The article is entitled Squirmy Toddler. There's an app for that. And the article from Miami AP News says there's a new routine these days whenever Amber Mullany goes out to eat at a restaurant. While waiting to be seated, she asked her husband to get the phone ready to hand over to their 2-year-old daughter, Tatum. The phone, with its ability to stream episodes of Dora the Explorer, is a godsend, said Mullany. Attempts at going out without whipping out a gadget have been disastrous, the mom says. And, they go on to say that the iPad is playing such a role. It's not just the iPhone. And it says here, quote, he quotes one woman, Denise Tuvenote, who acknowledges that some people would look askance at the idea of giving a child a $600 device to play with. She had the same concern initially. Then she discovered the sheer potential. She says, quote, the iPad is movies, books, and games all wrapped into one nice package, says Tivano, who works in the New Orleans tourism industry. The iPad, she says, keeps her 3-year-old son, Frankie, busy for hours, and when needed, taking it away is the greatest punishment. He loves it that much. So it's interesting. I mean, it's the same with my kids. My kids play games. They watch YouTube videos about animals or insects or Beyblades, which is a kind of top-like game for kids. My son loves to watch YouTube videos about Beyblades, and he also plays sort of electronic arts basketball game and all sorts of games. So it's a really great device. And what the AP story is saying here is that, parents all across the country are discovering that the iPad is a way to keep your child focused on things that are less, squirmy and destructive. So, interesting article. I'll have a link to it on the show notes. So John Gruber over at Daring Fireball, a great Mac Apple-centric blog, had a really great post on November 3rd entitled Brilliant Idea of the Day. And apparently there's a guy over at Apple Insider named Neil Hughes who commented on a research report by analyst Ben Reitz. And Ben Reitz said, quote, he believes the appeal of the iPad could be extended to more PC users if Apple were to extend keyboard options with touchpads in addition to the touchscreen interface on the iPad itself. So extend keyboard options with touchpads. So why would you then have a touchpad in addition to the touchscreen surface of the iPad? And John Gruber says, and what exactly would move on screen with the touchpad? The mouse cursor? Why take this guy seriously? This is like someone recommending to Amazon in 1996 that they should print a catalog of everything in their store. It is kind of silly. Like, why? I mean, this guy doesn't get the iPad. The iPad, the whole surface is a touch screen. So why would you have a touchpad? Because then you would have a mouse cursor moving around. It seems a little silly. Look, I have a much better idea, okay? So here's something truly cool, and I think Apple will one day do, and I've said it before. How about Apple makes the back of an iPad or the back of an iPhone touch sensitive? So, for example, when you're holding the iPad, your fingers are on the back, right? Well, what if you could have touch sensitive on the back and press virtual buttons or virtual keys? For example, what if apps could take advantage of the fact that the back of the screen is touch sensitive? On the flip side, for example, you could build virtual keys so that when you hold the iPad, you could play like, some sort of keyboard instrument, like an accordion, just by pressing your fingers to the back. Or you could, flip pages or something like that. In other words, rather than using your thumb, you could use your pointer finger on the back to flip through pages. In other words, the iPad would recognize finger gestures on the back the same as the front. To me, that's much more innovative than, having a touchpad or a keyboard. So anyways, good post by John Gruber. Okay, so one of the great apps on the iPad that apparently is very high up in the rankings and is free, not completely free, because if you want to like get more content, you got to do in-app purchases, is a great app called Play It Yourself for HD. And basically this is a music app, and it's a game that helps you learn to play the piano. So basically you see the score, according to the description, and the upcoming notes are highlighted for you to play on the built-in piano. It's by far the simplest way of playing new music. You can study scores, or you could follow the notes shown by the app and produce beautiful music effortlessly. It says kids absolutely love it. So this is pretty cool. It's like those old pianos in the past, those plastic pianos where the keys would light up, but here you have the score, and I guess you have virtual keys lighting up, and it says it shows you the music score and highlights the next note to play. Play notes using built-in piano. Choose what you want to practice and play it yourself. We'll play the rest for you. See the notes and melody practice right on your lighted keyboard. And you can add scores. You can edit and export your music with the free Music Score desktop app, and you can sync your scores through iTunes. And it includes, you know, some classic music pieces like Fur-Elise by Beethoven, Moonlight Sonata by Beethoven, Air on the G String by Bach, the St. Louis Rag by Turpin. Let's see what else. The Entertainer by Scott Joplin, Chopin's Waltz in H Moll, Brahms Waltz in A flat, The Star Spangled Banner, Carmen. So this is kind of cool. It's out in version 4.0.2. I mean, it's gotten kind of mixed reviews, but it's free, and it apparently is heavily downloaded. So, I don't know. I think it's worth testing out. It sounds kind of cool. So check it out. It's called Play It Yourself for HD. Now, one of the crazier devices that I've seen for the iPad is on the Kickstarter website. Now, if you're not familiar with Kickstarter, it's this website where if you have a good idea and they accept it, you can say, look, I'm raising money to make something, and you get donations from backers, and the backers in exchange might get an early access to your device. So somebody came up with something called the TouchFire, which is a sort of see-through keyboard plastic that latches on top of the screen of the iPad, the bottom half, and it perfectly aligns, I guess, with the virtual keyboard that pops up, but gives you tactile feeling for a keyboard. And it's going to be selling, I don't know, what's it selling for, like $45 or something like that. And you know, it's a very cool device. It says, how does it work? It says TouchFire fits right over the iPad's keyboard and is completely transparent. So the interesting thing is, through the transparent keyboard, which is sort of like raised, you can swipe over it. And so you can even swipe over pages and see through it. Now, I don't know how well you can see, because it looks like the keyboard is going to sort of block or make blurry, you know, at least the bottom third of your screen. But this, I wonder if people then make apps that work with this TouchFire so that the content's above the keyboard. So you might see somebody come up with like a writing app that works with this. So it also says it comes with a pair of cover clips which help TouchFire magnetically secure itself to your iPad's cover. So that would be a good way to sort of latch on. So right now there is 745 backers, and they've raised $51,900. Wow! So they were seeking to raise $10,000, and they've raised a lot. And with a pledge of $45, you pre-order the TouchFire Standard Pack. It contains a keyboard, a storage case, and a pair of cover clips, all in black. Shipping is free in the US. So it's a $45 product. So I don't know. It looks pretty cool. There's a video. Let's see what the video looks like. And I don't have Flash on my MacBook Air, so I'm not going to be able to do it. Anyways, it's definitely one of the cooler devices that I've seen. Okay, so one of my favorite apps recently is the Mint app, which is free and which, it had been on the iPad as an iPhone app, and which was kind of limited, and it has been out on the iPhone for a while. And what is the Mint app? Well, the Mint app works with the website mint.com, which has been around for a while. And what mint.com is, it's a website that helps you organize all your finances, your credit cards, your bank accounts, your brokerage accounts, anything involving money in one place. And Mint is very legitimate, and basically it was acquired by Quicken, but it seems to run as a separate division or something. And it's very secure. You basically log in to your online financial accounts, whether it's a credit card, whether it's your bank or brokerage firm, and Mint sort of pulls in your transactions and makes sense of it and makes it easy to tag and say like this check is for that purpose or this purpose. And Mint finally came out with an iPad version, and the iPad version is just amazing. I really think they did an incredible job. The coolest part, well, let me tell you what I think is the coolest part. The coolest part is that it now gives you like a pie like graph of all your finances. So I've been using this Mint app for a couple of years, and you can quickly adjust the period of time that you want to see the pie. So when you see the big circle pie, it says, well, this percentage is going to, let's say, home expenses like rent or mortgage. This is going to travel. This part of the pie is going to entertainment. And it'll quickly and beautifully give you the percentages. But if you want to drill down more, you can press on the slice of the pie, and it'll show you the details. But here's the other cool thing is you can also adjust it by scope of time. So in the bottom of like this view, you could say, I just want to see from April to May, a 2-month period. So then the pie is just the 2-month period. But I could pick out like a year period. But the beauty is it's like a slider. So once I pick out a year period, let's say January to December, I can then just slide it, and it'll keep that 1 year space, and I can slide it, and how about like February to January, and then just see, because then it gives me a steady view of like what I'm spending in the category. Because for example, it'll quickly show me if I adjust the 1 year period by 1 month, are my entertainment payments pretty much the same? That way you can quickly see it's not an aberration in 1 month. The other thing is you can quickly tag like cash expenses. I mean, one of the things that always bugged me before with like these online aggregating websites is that it's always hard to keep track of your cash spending. It would just appear like as an ATM withdrawal. But one of the cool things here is you can, if you spend cash, you can say, oh, I bought this with cash today. And you could set it up so that it automatically attributes that cash spending to your last ATM withdrawal. So it just really makes sense. And they're even highlighting on their websites the accolades they've gotten. They said that over 6 million people trust Mint, that it's featured in the App Starter Kit. And the Time magazine said it's one of the 50 best iPhone apps. Here's what it says that's new in version 2.0. Easy to understand multi-touch graphs show you where your money is going, so you get a clear picture of your spending and your net worth. Redesigned overview screen so you can get a quick snapshot of your finances and latest alerts, bill reminders, and advice. enter cash and pending transactions so you have the most accurate view of your spending, get a detailed view of your transactions, and view your data even without a wireless connection. Yeah, that's the other thing. I didn't have a connection, yet it had downloaded and had all the data there. So there's some screenshots here. Look, I think this app is amazing. And if you've never had Mint, this really takes Mint to an incredible higher level. Mint is free. The way Mint works is that they sell advertisements or suggestions to you. Like, so for example, if Mint will say, oh, I see that you're only making 1% interest in your bank account. Have you thought about these other banks that have maybe a little higher interest rate? So check it out, Mint. It's a great free app. Okay, so the ways that you can use the iPad as a cash register may soon expand. Now, I've talked about before, there's this great Square device which you can plug into the headphone jack of an iPad or iPhone, and it becomes a credit card reader. And Square also has an app that allows you to pay through your iPad or iPhone. Well, now electronista.com reports that there could be other such devices or applications posing a threat to Square's mobile service. And the article says that AT&T and Intuit team on phone and tablet payment system, and it says that AT&T has teamed up with Intuit to offer a small business owner the ability to process credit card transactions on their smartphone or tablet. And apparently the app is called Intuit Go Payment for AT&T, and it pairs an AT&T subscriber's compatible iOS, Android, or BlackBerry device with a small Bluetooth credit card reader. Equipped with them, a business person quickly can capture credit card information with a swipe of a few keystrokes, get authorization and instant payment credit. And with the system, a small person can process any major credit card from almost any location, send an email or text an electronic receipt directly from their device, and download the record into QuickBooks. So the service is transaction-based, and it carries no monthly fee, transaction or cancellation fees. And I guess small businesses are charged 2.7% of the swiped value. For larger retailers, it says here, with several cashiers and more than $1,000 in payments processed, Intuit is offering a $13 per month program. And subscribers are charged a lower rate of 1.7% on swipe transactions. So this apparently is undercutting Square, which charges 2.75% service fee. So look, overall, this is going to be good for businesses and consumers because, you're going to see more competition and cheaper prices. So I guess you could have your customer sign, the credit card on the iPad or iPhone. So it's very, very cool. And I think, we're seeing a new age in how business is going to be done. Now, another example of how the iPad is changing the way we're doing things comes from an article in PC World on November 8th. And it says Oregon introduces voting by the iPad. And the article by Eric Mack says some Oregon residents will cast their vote in a special primary election today using an iPad. It says here election workers in the 5 counties participating in the election to replace U.S. Representative David Wu, who resigned amid a sex scandal, have been seeking out residents with disabilities who might have a hard time making it to the polls and offering to let them make their choice with Apple's tablet computer instead. It says the portable system was chosen because it allows voters with limited mobility to make their choice in private, either by tapping their chosen candidate on the screen or using an attached sip and puff device for those who cannot use their fingers. Wow. So, but I wonder, is the iPad going to become a device for everyday voters? Now, it says here the iPad voting experiment began in 2010 because much of the state's voting equipment for people with disabilities was reaching the end of its life, and the state was looking for more inexpensive replacements. Apple donated 5 iPads for the project, and the state developed the voting software. So this is interesting. Maybe, like I said, maybe after, people with disabilities use it, it will become something that is inexpensive and that could replace a lot of voting booths. We'll see. Now, Apple Insider has an interesting article from somebody named Daniel Aran Dilger, saying that when Retina display finally comes to the iPad 3, it will enable precision required for pilots and doctors. And I guess in a way he's making an obvious point, which is, as we get a better screen with more resolution, which would be a resolution, let's say 2048 by 1536, you're going to have such precision and detail in that screen that it's going to open up other things. So, for example, he points out that airplane charts, a lot of pilots use airplane charts, and you need a lot of detail. And if you have a really detailed high pixel screen on an iPad 3, you might get even more pilots using it. Similarly, doctors, when looking at x-rays and details in the body, the more resolution you have, the better and more precise it's going to be. So look, he's making an obvious point. Obviously, if you get much, much more detail, you're going to get just much richer and more comprehensive apps that replicate the real world. So, in a way, he's stating the obvious. Okay, so that's it for episode 79 of the iPad podcast. This is Lex at Max Future. This is a slightly abbreviated version. Usually I go an hour, but, I'm still trying to get back on my feet. Remember, this is a chit-chat-free podcast all about the iPad, and I'll be back hopefully this Sunday with a lot more iPad news. Thanks for listening, and check it out on YouTube, Blip TV, and the iTunes Store. Thanks for listening. Bye.